Hey guys, I'm back to answer another military viewer Q&A question. And that question has to do with current events in the world right now, and it is about thermobaric weapons. And this viewer kind of was wondering, well, basically, what are thermobaric weapons and kind of how do they work? How are they different from regular explosive weapons, especially since we hear a lot about them with the war going on in Ukraine right now. And so that's a pretty good question. What is a thermobaric weapon? Is it really different than a conventional explosive weapon? And the answer is yeah. And the reason is, or the way it's different is how it actually goes about doing its blowy uppy thing. And I've got some cool visual aids to try to explain it and make it make sense. So first of all, let's talk about what thermobaric is. So the name thermobaric is actually, it comes from Greek. That's where we get it from. Thermobaric meaning heat and pressure. And that is exactly how a thermobaric weapon works. It creates an enormous amount of heat and an enormous amount of pressure in two different ways that we'll get to. And that's how it does its work, its job, its terrible, terrible job. And that's not entirely different than how a regular explosive warhead goes off, but the thermobaric does it with a different detonation sequence or a different type of fuel that makes it particularly more destructive and a terrible, horrific ending to any people that might be around, okay? So in order to understand what a thermobaric is, let's talk about what a regular bomb, missile, whatever warhead would be. So basically, when we have, whether it's an artillery shell, a missile warhead, a bomb warhead, think of, I'm going to use this flashlight. It is an enclosed, self-contained device, okay? And inside of it, we have a fuel and an oxidizer source. And it is compressed into a canister, into whatever it happens to be. Now, that does not mean that they're small, we have very large capacity warheads that can do enormous amounts of damage, but they are contained. And basically when they go off, the explosive force is there. It is built into what it is. And a lot of the damage that is done is the explosive blast wave. It's the heat of the explosion that's in there, but it's also the metal container that we put it in. Now, it doesn't have to be metal, okay? They can do these in a cellulose container, but that's a different kind of thing. But a lot of the damage is done by the fragmentation of the container that explosive warhead is contained in. And that also can limit the explosive blast damage that goes off. And it's kind of a balance depending on how they want that warhead to function. A contained warhead, a self-contained explosive device, boy, YouTube's gonna hate me after this one. I am not teaching anybody how to build anything. I need to say this for YouTube's purposes. I'm just explaining how they work in a general, all right? This has nothing to do with any of the technical aspects. It goes off and basically all of the fuel and power is inside of it. All right, now, we classify in the United States anyway, all of our, I'm gonna talk about like an airdropped munition, okay? We base them off of what we've had for decades and decades, the Mark 80 series, okay? And so basically the Mark 82 is a 500 pounder, the Mark 83 is 1,000 pounds. Now that's, the bomb itself can weigh different things, but I'm telling you, like, in general, so you've got the Mark 82 500 pound bomb, you've got the Mark 83 1,000 pound, you've got the Mark 84 2,000 pound bomb, and those are the just basically the general most used things. And now you can plug and play different things into them. So for example, the GBU 12 is a laser guided package. Once it goes on to the Mark 82 basic bomb itself, it becomes a GBU 12. The GBU 38 is the JDAM kit, and once the fusing and the JDAM kit plugs into it, it becomes, into the Mark 82, it becomes the GBU 38 JDAM. So, but everything's based off of these known quantity by weight, and that's how they know the explosive power of these different bombs when they do them. And we have some much bigger ones. We have one called the GBU 28 Deep Throat. That's the actual name. It was one of the first bunker busters. It was made by basically taking howitzer gun tubes and cutting them down. And but we have other ones now. There's also some you might hear them referred to as BLUs, and that refers to the warhead. Anyway, there's a million different variations of it. Okay, but those are actual contained warheads. Now, a thermobaric bomb works differently because a thermobaric bomb, rather than relying on this self-contained, droppable, or shootable warhead with a finite amount of power it has, uses the actual atmosphere itself to become a bomb and releases an immense amount of power. But it doesn't contain any secondary effects. It doesn't, so we don't have any fragmentation involved in it. It is like we said, the heat and the pressure of the bomb. So it will be contained in some kind of projectile. So one of the systems that Russia is using in Ukraine right now is the TOS-1, and it's like a self-propelled rocket artillery system. It's kind of similar to our M270 MLRS. So they have a modified T-72 chassis, right? From the T-72 tank, and then they put a rocket launching system on top of it. And the warheads in that rocket can hold a thermobaric weapon. We, in the United States military, have very successfully used what we call a fuel air explosive, which is a kind of a standard thermobaric weapon system warhead. We air deliver them, and we've used them. Kind of one of the first publicly released and noticeable times was in Operation Desert Storm. We use them to clear minefields. We also use them in a psychological effect to let the Iraqis know, like, hey, we're coming. And we also use them to kind of spoof that we were going to do a beach landing. And one of the things that Iraqi prisoners said was when they saw these fuel air explosives, I'm going to explain exactly what that means in a minute, they thought that we might have dropped a nuclear weapon, because in terms of sheer explosive power, when these things go off, they're next to nuclear weapons almost, in terms of, depending on the size. But when these things go off with that fireball and the blast wave, yeah, there's not much between them and the power of a nuclear shockwave of the same size, when you compare bomb to bomb. Anyway, so let's talk about thermobaric. So whereas in a regular bomb you have your fuel and your oxidizer and everything together in a single warhead, thermobaric does not have any oxidizer in it. It just is packed with fuel, and that's it. And what happens is that bomb or that rocket or whatever it happens to be goes out, and at its target area it has a small charge that opens the warhead up, and it ejects that fuel. And when we talk about a fuel air explosive, which is the type I'm going to talk about, they're all pretty much the same. Some are liquid, some are dry powdered fuel, but they work the same. What they do is they create an airborne mist of whatever that is, powder or fuel. So if you want to compare this in a civilian, just to get your mindset on it, you don't just pour liquid gasoline in an engine. It aerosolizes it because liquid gasoline doesn't explode, but the mist does, and this is the same thing. So it aerosolizes that fuel mist because it has a huge explosive property. And here's my prop. So see that? You end up with that in the air. And it's timed so that when you have the greatest dispersion of that airborne mist in the air, then there is a charge that goes off, small charge, just enough to detonate that airborne mist. When that airborne mist of whatever the substance has to be, and honestly, I don't know what it is. That's never been in my wheelhouse to be trained on that. I know how they work. I don't know what they're made of specifically. Like I said, it can be a dry powdered substance. It can be a liquid substance. That's why it's called fuel air explosives. I know that the ones we used to use were a liquid fuel type. I don't know what they are now. When that airborne mist of fuel explodes, it needs to oxidize to make that explosion, and so it gets that oxidization, that literal oxygen, from the air surrounding it. And when it explodes, it is a huge explosion. It is an immediate huge explosion. Bigger in terms of power than what you have packed into this small, relatively small warhead. In fact, a smaller sized fuel air explosive will give you a bigger explosive yield than a similar sized conventional bomb. However, because of the nature of the way that aerosolized fuel explodes, it is a shorter lived detonation, if that makes sense. It uses the oxygen much faster. It burns the fuel much faster because it's spread out, because it's not compressed the way it is. So it would be used on different targets, for example. There's just a different way you use the two. But anyway, back to the thermobarics. So what happens when it draws that oxygen out of the air? It does that in, like we said, because it's a quicker, shorter explosion, it happens in a much more violent, rapid manner. Like, if you were to detonate this over, say, near buildings, where there is an internal air pressure in the building, it rapidly, or caves, or people with lungs, for example, it rapidly and instantly creates a negative pressure inside as it sucks the oxygen out to fuel the explosion, creating a negative pressure. And that causes implosions in buildings, in caves, and yes, inside people's lungs. So it's not banned by the Geneva Convention. It's not undue suffering, because believe me, that's instant horrible death. But it can bring down a cave through that. It can destroy a building through that negative pressure implosion, and it can do horrifically things to the human body through that. And we're not even talking about the blast wave yet that has happened. So instantaneously creates that negative pressure to fuel the explosion. As then the explosion hits, and that negative pressure is now replaced by an unbelievably amount of blast wave overpressure, sorry, is what I was trying to say. So you have two simultaneous effects almost. I mean, and I say simultaneously because I think it's almost imperceivable to the human eye and mind, the separation. We're talking millisecond difference between the negative pressure implosion and the blast pressure overwave that replaces it. But I mean, it's almost, if you want to picture in your mind, imagine slamming on your brakes in a car, and at first you go forward and then you go backwards. But imagine if that happened so fast that, like, you don't even know if you're going forward or back. It's like, that's like the difference between the negative pressure and the forward pressure. It's hitting almost simultaneously. So you have the damage that was done from the negative pressure, the implosion, and then whatever's been weakened or damaged is now being hit in the exact opposite manner by that huge overpressure wave that does probably 3 to 4 times more damage because of the explosive potential being released. And now you also have that intense, brief, but intense heat wave from that intense, huge explosion that, by the way, people look at and they think, oh my God, this must be a nuclear bomb going off, because of how huge it is, because of the bright flash, because of the heat. In Desert Storm, people saw this go off 10s, 20, 30 miles away, saw this flash in the sky, heard the boom, thought that a nuclear bomb had gone off. I mean, it's enormous. It's huge. It does not create the same billow of smoke in the sky that like a big pillar of smoke and a cloud that a regular explosive does, because again, it burns up all of its fuel rapidly and all at once. Now, if there are secondary fires on the ground, things that it has caused to catch on fire, you will see them on fire and stuff. But the thermobaric explosion goes off and goes away very quickly, very quickly. There might be a little residual smoke in the air that dissipates. So after a thermobaric has gone off, rapidly afterwards, you might not even know it has gone off unless you survey the damage and see it. There is virtually zero chance that human life will survive a thermobaric explosion unless you are in some kind of protected, building or some kind of thing designed to survive it. Armored vehicles, it's a crapshoot whether or not that's going to survive it. I mean, I've seen actual test footage where tanks, armored personnel carriers, and everything were just tumbled as if a nuclear bomb had gone off, just tumbled away. We're talking about that negative pressure that can kill people inside the vehicles, even if the vehicle's fine. If you're not completely buttoned up, and not every vehicle has that perfect airtight, especially we're talking in Ukraine where everybody's fighting with old Soviet stuff. It's not really well equipped for a nuclear, biological, chemical battlefield. And that's what you need to survive, a negative pressure and overpressure environment. You know what I mean? You need that perfect airtight stuff. So anyway, I know this was not the most detailed video. I'm sorry I didn't have really great visual aids to show it to you, but that answers the question: what is a thermobaric device and how does it work, and why is it different from from regular explosives? They're very effective when used on the proper targets. An underground bunker is probably not going to be affected by a thermobaric bomb unless it has unshielded venting towards the outside. Then maybe. But the way that it's being used against above ground buildings, fortifications, and just people, devastating weapon, terrible weapon. I am so grateful and thankful I have never had to see it employed in combat. I have PTSD already. I don't think I could survive seeing the aftermath. Interesting question. Glad I could answer it. Hope this is a little informative to you guys. Yeah, thermobarics are incredibly violent weapons, but very effective against the correct target set. Should absolutely never, by any law of land warfare, be used anywhere near where civilians may possibly be present at all. I will always answer your military Q&A questions if it's within my knowledge base, and if it's not, I will reach out to my guys who are still in and see what info I can get. And if it's over my head, I will just tell you, sorry, this is not what I can do. But anyway, thanks for the question. Thanks for giving me a chance to answer it for you. I hope you learned something. And remember that you guys are absolutely awesome. I appreciate every single one of you. And I'll be back again real soon.